What's up guys, Kickass Milkman here and welcome to a new show where I compare some of my favourite old games with ones that have just recently been released in the same series. Today I'm going to be comparing the, to a certain extent, fairly controversial Bioshock Infinite with one of my favourite games of all time, and for me at least the series benchmark, the original Bioshock. Don't get me wrong, the older Shock games, System Shock 1 and 2 are great, but I think Bioshock is the best mainstream realisation of the series as a whole, and with that out the way, let's get started. Okay, so the first thing to compare about these games on is their story. For a lot of games, the story takes a backseat behind gameplay, but for the Shock series, narrative is key. Both Bioshock and Bioshock Infinite have excellent stories, with each game having unique pacing. In the original Bioshock, the player is swept along by a calming Irish voice through Atlas. Playing as Jack, you initially try to save Atlas's family, and eventually seek revenge on their killer, Andrew Ryan. He's a maverick entrepreneur who establishes this underwater dystopia, and one of my favourite villains in gaming. But it's not until the events in Ryan's office that the story becomes truly unforgettable, and for me this event is one of the best plot twists ever conceived, and that's why I'm not going to risk spoiling it to anyone here. This amazing plot of Bioshock 1 created an issue for Rational while they were scripting Infinite. Every single person that is playing the game is going to be running around and trying to play a game I like to call Where's the Twist? You expect there to be one. There can't be a Shock game without a Shyamalan moment, and anyone who thinks that is absolutely right. There is a twist. It is mind-blowing, and it links to Bioshock 1 in incredible ways. Let's just say that the game does more than just a subtle nod to Bioshock 1. That wrench you find in the First Lady's airship, that isn't it. What makes the twist so special is that it justifies a second playthrough of the game all on its own, just to see the little cues that led up to it. I would, however, just say that I felt those cues were at times a bit too heavy-handed, and because of this, I worked out a fair chunk of the game's ending about halfway in, which is a pain in the arse. What isn't a pain in the arse, however, good god, that is a terrible segue, is the fantastic ways in which both games use interesting plot devices. Both games include the now overused audio diaries to keep you interested in combing every corner of the environment for scene-setting voice recordings. They're paced just so in both games to heighten the mood of certain in-game scenes. One great example from the first game is an audio diary where one of Ryan's lackeys, Sullivan, is interrogating someone on a log. At the same time, the game presents you with the aftermath. Infinite does this well as well. The best example for me is when the janitor of Monument Island is talking about the scientist's reaction to Elizabeth. Walking through the halls addled with keep away signs and hearing about her godlike powers from a casual observer does a great job of setting the tone. In addition to the brilliantly voiced audio logs, both games make use of radio to keep the player engaged in current events. This was an essential tool in Bioshock 1. Atlas, the calming Irish tone that keeps the player sane while trudging through Rapture, couldn't exist without the game's radio-based form of storytelling. Infinite doesn't do this to the same degree. Think gives you the odd radio call, but most of the controversial stuff is dealt with face to face. Overall, I think that Bioshock was very much a story of one man wandering scared into an unknown underwater hellhole and fucking with the ecosystem. But Infinite doesn't want to make the player feel desolate. You have a constant companion for basically the whole game, making this borderline impossible. Basically, what I'm trying to get at is the devices used in Bioshock 1 suit that game, and Infinite's more contact-heavy approach suits that game. On top of all that good stuff, both games have genuinely interesting and fully realised characters. Sander Cohen from Bioshock 1 is my favourite crazy person ever to grace the video gaming medium. On the other hand, Elizabeth, Infinite's ace in the hole, is the most well-rounded and well-humanised character in all of gaming. Courtney Draper's superb voice work, coupled with Elizabeth's slightly larger-than-life facial expressions, mean that you can always tell the tone that Irrational was going for in any given scene. At one point early in the game, her home, Monument Island, is damaged, the effects of which you can see on the promenade at Battleship Bay. Seeing her earnest shock and upset makes the player reflect on what just happened, and does a great job of further immersing you in the world. Overall, these are both games with fantastic narratives that have the ability to shock and surprise even the most cynical gamer. Their interesting devices is coupled with the representation of some of the worst aspects of human nature. Bioshock illustrated how greed coupled with objectivist moral principles could lead even the most enlightened society into civil war. Infinite makes the player take a genuine look at racial issues, presenting a surface view of this kind of Disney-esque environment that has this horrid racist undercurrent when you scratch away at the surface. Comstock, the main villain of Infinite, is less intelligent of a leader than Rowan, but he has manipulated the whole of Colombia into thinking he's a prophet and turned America into a religion, yet another interesting aspect of the game's story. If I had to choose which game had a better story, I would struggle. They both present interesting stories, with fascinating characters backed up by well executed and creative plot devices that perfectly suit each game. So I think it's fair to call this round a draw. Okay, having looked at the game's story in depth, it's time to take a look at their presentation, another aspect that the Shock games have perfected down to a T. These games both have fairly openly explorable environments, but exploring them wouldn't be any fun if their design was crap. Luckily, these games have some of the most coherent and immersive universes in all of gaming. Rapture is this stunning, flooded underwater Art Deco nightmare, and every inch of it is bursting with character. Columbia is this beautiful realization of American exceptionalist principles, a floating city in the sky which, when explored, instantly invokes feelings of turn-of-the-century America. That is, until you see someone's stomach being torn out by crows in one of the game's brooding and creepy indoor sections. What this does is break away from Bioshock's coherent theme. Infinite is very much a game where environmental juxtaposition is key to selling the world and the story, and the incredible visuals help to do that. Don't get me wrong, at the time Bioshock 1 was one of the best looking games on the market, and some of its more out there and varied environments, like the beautifully lit Fort Frolic and vibrant foliage filled Arcadia, were incredible. But Columbia is just so achingly beautiful, and the lighting and palette just help to make this world feel that much more real. Both games also feature incredible sound design. Bioshock 1 had a ton of sad violin and eerily employed period music. Infinite repeats this trick, but with some noticeable improvements. For one, there's licensed music that seeps through the tears in the fabric of space-time and adds to the mystery of the world around you, and becomes an element of a smaller plot point. On top of this, Infinite features dynamic music while the player is in combat. Hearing the music jab and pierce as you shoot the sniper rifle makes headshotting foes that much more of an event, and this is all topped off with tunes that conclude each spell of combat. It's all very minimalistic, but more effective because of that, as it doesn't break the immersion. All in all, both games are excellent examples of presentation done right, but Infinite just edges its predecessor with its more dynamic, story-relevant and diverse score, with graphics that heighten the levels of immersion that the game achieves. And now for the most important aspect of any game, the quality of the game's gameplay. This has been the source of the most debate over how good Infinite is, and with good reason. There are a couple of things you'll notice when you're first given free rein to explore Columbia, especially if you've played Bioshock 1. One will be that the path you're taking seems oddly linear, and another will be that all your bin raiding will only net you food and money in the way of consumables. You might think that this is just to initially set the scene. I mean, Bioshock 1 had an opening section just like this, right? Well, I'm here to tell you that this isn't going to change, as there's no longer a way to hoard health kits, and this game's equivalent of Eve hypos, which are used to power your supernatural abilities and are known as vials of salt in this game. Instead, the game gives you a poxy regenerative shield, capable of absorbing around about 3 bullets on the game's highest difficulty, and then gets Elizabeth to toss you health kits, vials of salt and ammo when her coding allows. This is intended to make her feel more essential, but it just ends up pissing me off by disincentivizing a certain set of players from fully exploring the jaw-dropping world. Another factor that removes some of the interest from exploration is the game's equivalent of Bioshock 1's core upgrade system, Gear. These replace the gene tonics, which allowed the player to personalise and create a build of the protagonist, Jag, which suited their playstyle. This massively oversimplified system of uninteresting clothing inexplicably strengthens Booker's combat abilities. The worst thing I found about this system is how certain early game items could be straight set upgrades of those found later in the game. This reduces player progression and, again, disincentivizes exploration and makes it harder to specialize in the use of specific types of this game's version of plasmids, Vigors. Plasmids were cool genetically modified superpowers that allowed a man to shoot a bolt of lightning from his hand with a lecture bolt, for example. Vigors are back, and they're cool too. At least they would be if they were even remotely different from the first game's plasmids. I mean, sure, they've renamed them. Electrobolt is now Shockjock, Incinerate is now Devil's Kiss, and Insect Swarm is now Mother of Crows, but they fill the same roles and don't really progress the concept in the same way as abilities in games like Dishonored did. There are some notable exceptions. It's fun to hose down your enemies with Undertow or catch bullets and fling them back with a return to sender, and you can combine the effects of different vigors for some interesting results, like crows that fly around the battlefield and set your enemies alight. But you can't access the cooler vigors until too late into the game to draw away from your already upgraded vigors, and there's nothing that lets you fling high yield explosives at your foes right from the outset, like telekinesis, or set traps with your special ammo and lure them onto them with target dummy. Admittedly, all vigors can be converted to some form of trap, but they're all essentially interchangeable. No one trap conveys a tactical advantage over another in any of the game's different combat situations. They just incapacitate your foes and deal damage. Which brings me neatly to another point. You can't set traps with special ammo at all, because there isn't any. You get to hold two guns at a time, both with one ammo type. This vastly reduces player choice when prepping for combat, or the player's ability to adapt their ammo and weapon combinations to suit different enemies during combat. The two-weapon system also means there's no point purchasing the gun upgrades. Why would I want to upgrade my shotgun if I'm only going to have to swap it with a rifle in a minute anyway? This is made even worse by the astronomical cost of these upgrades, replacing a simple one-use weapon upgrade mechanic which existed in the first game through the power of the people machines, and yet makes the player progression even worse. On the note of player progression, if you're asking if there's more in Infinite, well, yes, there's the infusions where you're given the choice to either upgrade the capacity of your redundant shield, health, or salt. Other than that, you've got the vigor upgrades, which are largely too costly to be viable, and that's your lot. No fun and interesting research minigame, which gave you damage upgrades and some of the most powerful tonics. No way to create even more interesting tonics using U-invent machines with collected scrap, the absence of which just adds another nail to the low exploration coffin. The game does, however, try to artificially increase the amount of exploration by presenting the player with ciphers and locked doors and safes, both of which only Elizabeth can crack. Yet another ploy to make her feel essential. The ciphers are essentially involve finding a codebook, which is generally located on the way to your next objective. No need to backtrack, however, because the path laid out for you will lead you back this way anyway. As for lockpicks, these are strewn throughout the environment and are easily found, though the money contained within the chests and infusions and audio diaries hidden behind closed doors does make seeking them out worthwhile. You can just use an exploit which gives you as much money in lockpicks as you want anyway. These factors combine not only to make combat much less interesting from a preparatory perspective, but also lessens the impact of the game's marquee fights, battles with the heavy hitters, which are Infinite's equivalent of the first game's big daddies. Heavy hitters appear out of nowhere at scripted points during the game and immediately attack. There's no pre-fight build-up as there was with the Big Daddy, seeing that hulking powerhouse trudge around Rapture only being provoked when you or a splicer initiated combat. This built tension and gave the player time to assemble traps, enrage nearby splicers, and hack nearby turrets and security drones to assist in dealing damage. On top of this, these factors shear off layers of complexity in the combat in general. I think that Bioshock 1 struck the perfect balance when simplifying action RPG elements for the mainstream, and Bioshock Infinite has now taken this simplification one step too far. The combat does, however, have its own unique redeeming qualities, the first being the skyhook, which allows the player to ride a roller coaster around the battlefield, leaping off the skylines to deal damage and then escape, further emphasizing the mobility of combat encouraged and the fact that the player needs to be constantly changing weapons. There are plenty of thrilling moments when you run out of ammo on your favourite weapon, swoop around the skyline, bludgeoning an enemy with your skyhook, and then steal his gun to take down that pesky heavy hitter that's been hounding you all fight. It's exhilarating and fun, and the presence of Elizabeth, who can open tears to bring in elements to help you out even more, adds an additional layer of complexity to the combat which it so desperately needs. However, she can only open one tear at a time. Should I open the tear that gives me another hook to latch onto, or get her to summon in a friendly turret to deal damage and create a distraction? It's these questions that really do help make the combat that much more dynamic and fun. All in all, I think Elizabeth's abilities do make her feel essential and just cement her further as a contender for my favourite female video game character. As for combat, it does have its fluid, visceral charm, and while I feel that I prefer Bioshock 1's more thoughtful and preparatory approach to combat, I can appreciate why some people may prefer Infinite in this regard. As for the player progression aspect, Bioshock 1 is just better, and that's why it's a better game overall. It's a more cohesive package, an amazing universe and story that's beautifully presented, just as Infinite is, but on top of that you've got this stellar player choice as well as meaningful and superior overall themes. And that's my winner, Bioshock. So if you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll talk to you guys later.